From JBS Studios in Greater New York, this is the JBS News Update with Teisha Bader.
Hi, this is Micah Halpern sitting in for Teisha Bader, and here is the JBS News Update for Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. The United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has announced that Iran is producing uranium that could be used to build a nuclear bomb. This discovery by the IAEA is a major obstacle to renewing talks between the P5+1 and Iran. The IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi said that his inspectors now found that Iran had produced 200 grams of 20% enriched uranium. Just a few months ago, Iran had produced only 3.6 grams at 20%. The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said the move by Iran was unconstructive and inconsistent with a return to mutual compliance. He said Iran has no credible need to produce uranium metal, which has direct relevance to nuclear weapons development. Such escalations will not provide Iran negotiating leverage in any renewed talks on a mutual return to the JCPOA compliance and will only lead to Iran's further isolation. He further said that Iran's nuclear advances have a bearing on our view of returning to the JCPOA and suggested that the U.S. was slowly running out of patience. Price said, "We are not imposing a deadline for negotiations, but this window will not remain open indefinitely." Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics reported that the country's GDP, the gross domestic product, grew by a whopping 15.4% in the second quarter compared with the previous quarter. The rise was attributed to the lifting of most coronavirus restrictions during the second quarter and a return to near-normal economic activity. The first 3 months of 2021 were characterized by a national closure and severe economic restrictions. According to the CBS, the Central Bureau of Statistics, a significant increase in car sales during the second quarter also drove the GDP growth. Business GDP grew by 19.8% during that quarter. Private consumption grew by 36.3%, or 23.3% excluding durable goods. Meanwhile, Israel's Consumer Price Index, the CPI, rose by 0.4% in July, a tad more than expected. The measure of inflation has risen by 2% since the beginning of 2021 and 1.9% over the past 12 months. In the north of Israel, prices have risen by 11.6% over the past year, compared to smaller increases in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. The CBS delivered very good news to Israel. Human Rights Watch announced that during the recent war between Israel and Hamas, Gazans committed war crimes. The group was referring to deadly rockets fired into Israel by the Palestinians, rockets that led to the deaths of 12 Israelis and the injury of tens of others. The Human Rights Group also pointed out that rockets that misfired or that fell short of their intended targets within Israel also killed or wounded an undetermined number of Palestinians in Gaza. At least 7 Palestinian civilians were reported killed by their rockets. This is newsworthy. Traditionally, Human Rights Watch has been extremely critical of Israel and extremely wary of saying anything negative against Palestinians. Because they were so biased, their credibility was a serious question. Have they finally seen the light of truthful reporting? It is way too soon to tell. Bees are not just our source of honey. Bees are, more importantly, an essential part of the ecosystem, and bee population is becoming rare. Without bees, the ecosystem will break down. Bees are now at risk because of very aggressive farming methods and because they are being poisoned by pesticides. An Israeli startup named BeeWise, that's a pun, is helping save the bees and save the world. They are using a robot. The robot makes hives, stacks the combs using robot arms, and inspects the honeycombs for disease and pesticides. It also issues real-time reports on anything that could be determined to be threatening the bee colonies. This robot can house 24 colonies. That's about 2 million bees. It is about the size of a cargo container. The developers of BeeWise hope to have 100 of these systems operating in the United States and Israel. Here's a look at tonight's programming for JBS for Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. At 7, Ellie Cohanim speaks with Amit, Deri, and Majid Sarrah, co-founders of Sharaka, the Gulf Israel Center for Social Entrepreneurship, built to strengthen the new era of cooperation between Israel and the UAE. At 7:30, a ceremony marking the anniversary of the terrorist bombing of a Buenos Aires Jewish Center that murdered 85 people in a memorial service by AJC Westchester, Fairfield, at Congregation Emanu-El of Westchester. At 9, Mark Golub sits down with Esther Wachsman, mother of IDF soldier Nachshon, who was kidnapped and murdered by Palestinian terrorists in 1994. At 10, JNS editor-in-chief Jonathan Tobin speaks with columnist and editor Ruthie Bloom about how smearing Israel serves to legitimize anti-Semitism and Hamas on Top Story, a program of JNS. And coming up next, Thinking Out Loud with Micah Halpern. That's me. I'll see you in a few minutes. This is Micah Halpern and the JBS News Date. I want to wish everyone a good evening.